with just one glance. This poor boy was moved. He knows exactly what women do. She was put in front of men at a clear price. A lot of people throw a lot of money at her, just because she is the most beautiful and famous woman in town. Faced with such a life, she was left with numbness and resignation. She didn't know this poor boy who fell in love with her at first sight would give his all for her. Angie is the illegitimate daughter of a rich man. Once she lived a life of luxury, but after the other man got tired of her mother, they were completely abandoned. It didn't last long. Within a few years, her mother died of a disease. Angie, who had no one to turn to, she was sold to a rich duke. As a young girl, she didn't know her bad luck was just beginning. The noble duke is a pedophile. He not only treats little Angie as a plaything, and when she grows up, he shares her with others in exchange for profit. Unhappy with her fate, Angie escaped from death. She came to this town. When she arrived, she was robbed and beaten up. A woman saved her. But it was also this woman completely sent Angie to hell. Under torture, Angie began a business of skin without dignity. Life went on like this, without expectation, until the day Carl fell in love with her at first sight. He was a young, kind-hearted farmer. He worked every day at sunrise and sunset. Life was simple and peaceful. His wish is to meet a girl to spend his life with. By chance, he saw Angie walking. Just by looking at each other from a distance, Carl was sure that this was the one he wanted. So he starts asking around about Angie. He was advised by his acquaintances that she wasn't the right girl for him. But Carl didn't care. He went to great lengths to meet Angie. To the shy Carl, Angie just saw him as a playboy who paid for fun.
I'm gonna marry you.
In the face of this sudden marriage proposal, Angie did not take it seriously, because over the years, she was not impressed by the sudden proposal. Because over the years, there were more than 100 men who said they wanted to marry him. She kicked Carl out right away. But what she didn't expect was that Carl didn't give up. He found Angie again and again.
Let me get you out of this place. I'm serious. Marry me.
Slowly Angie began to be a little shaken, but just as she was asking Madam with the idea of leaving, Madam was furious. She ordered her men to beat Angie all over her body. Cocker seemed to feel what had happened to his lover. When he arrived, Angie was already dying. He took out all his savings. He took her back to his farm. After 3 weeks of loving care, Angie finally recovered. But she never wanted to spend her life here with Carl. So while he was out of the house, Angie left quietly. Just as she was halfway down the street, Carl caught up with her. Surprisingly enough, he didn't take Angie back by force. Instead, he just gave her plenty of water and food. There was even money. Carl wanted Angie to make her own choice. She could go back to the town and continue her life as before, or she could go back to the farm and start a different life.
That way is home. File, food, and your husband. Your choice.
After that, Carl rode off on his horse, and Angie stayed where she was, deep in thought.
Marry me.
This is the 99th time he has proposed. Just then the woman's boss knocked on the door. Because Carl's time was up, it's the next customer's turn. As a celebrity, she didn't believe in love at all, but the poor boy slowly opened the door to her heart. After being rescued, Angie still wants to leave. Carl gave her 2 ways out. When night falls, Angie returned to the farm again. She made her choice, and Carl didn't say much. Just prepared a delicious dinner for her and washed her feet before she went to bed. Looking at this man who was so attentive to her, Angie's heart was suddenly touched. The next day, Angie started a completely different life than before. She changed into her most ordinary dress. She followed Carl to the fields to work. They gathered eggs together, fishing together, they chopped wood together, doing the most ordinary things together. But in the process of doing so, Angie's heart was at peace like never before. Late at night she wanted to return the favor to Carl, but he refused. Then Angie realized the man in front of her was really different from the man she used to know. Only late at night, nightmares still haunted her from time to time. Carl wanted to help her get out of the shadow of her past, so he took her to the top of the mountain, where she could see the first rays of sunlight of the day, and to find the hope that had been lost for so long. Bask in the sunshine, soaking in Carl's love. Angie's closed heart slowly opened up. She finally accepted Carl completely. She thought life would get better and better. But then Carl's brother Paul appeared, shattered the peace. He recognized Angie for who she was. He didn't think she was good enough for Carl. So while Carl was away, Paul humiliated Angie. At the same time, He warned Carl to stay away from women like Angie. Carl was very angry when he heard these words. He beat up Paul directly and told him to leave his farm as soon as possible. And Angie, after being humiliated by Paul, realized that she was not good enough for Carl. So when Paul left, she asked him to take her back to the town with him. But the evil of human nature is often unpredictable. Halfway there, Angie had no money. Paul asked her for money for the journey. Soon Paul was satisfied, came out from behind the rock, back to the town. Angie found that the place where she used to work no longer existed. She had to go back to her old job somewhere else. But Carl soon came looking for her. In the face of the fighters, he tried his best to get Annie out of the mud again. Angie couldn't understand why Carl was so determined. And Carl's answer was always simple and firm, that he loved her. Angie doesn't understand where this love comes from. Should she believe it? So she chose to remain silent. In the farm late at night, Angie suddenly woke up. She saw Carl silent crying in the warehouse. A moment of guilt and regret flooded her heart. At that moment she understood the meaning of love. The next day she went to the cold water of the stream. She washed her body desperately until her skin was red and bleeding. She still didn't stop, as if this was the only way to cleanse her filth a little. When Carl saw her, he was distressed, hastily stopped and soothed her, lying on Carl's lap, listening to his gentle whispers. Angie finally decided to stay by this man's side from now on. She had opened her body to countless men, but she had never opened her soul to anyone. Even though she left without saying goodbye again and again, Carl never gave up on her either. Angie resumed her happy life on the farm. Soon a neighbor's baby was born. Watching the baby being born, Angie felt a sense of shock and hope, and at the same time, she learned how much Carl loved children. Angie had a history that prevented her from having children. After thinking about it, she had to admit she could not give Carl a complete family. So, she tried to set up the girl next door, Mia, with Carl. He left a letter for Mia and left alone, hoping that Mia could take her place to stay by Carl's side. And back in town, Angie did not continue her previous job. She worked as a waitress in a restaurant, although the pay was meager. But there was a peace in her heart that she had never known before. But it didn't last long. The Duke found out about her. Not only did he burn down the restaurant where she worked, he also forced her to continue doing what she used to do. Then the Duke took her home. And there Angie saw the young girl. She instantly thought of herself at that time. Angie wanted to help them but couldn't. Listening to the little girl's screams, she could only cover her face and cry in pain and helplessness. In order for Angie to be here to receive more guests, the Duke gave a big dinner party for her to introduce her to all the rich people. Before going on stage, Angie saw her mother, who had passed away many years ago. She encouraged her gently. She told her to be brave for herself. Be brave for all the victimized girls. And so, Angie stood on the center of the stage in front of the crowd, revealed the Duke's evil deeds all along. His ugliness was exposed to the public, and this completely angered the Duke. He took Angie back to his room and tried to kill her. Luckily, the local inspector arrives in time to save her. Angie then rescued the little girl who had been captured, and the angry people. The Duke was duly punished. As the evening drew on, the inspector watched Angie take the two girls, running as fast as he could, though the road ahead was dark, but their hearts always had a desire for light. 3 years later, Paul ran into Angie again in a church. She is now a self-made woman, completely free from the gloom of the past. Paul told Angie Mia was now pregnant. Hearing this news, Angie's heart was full of sadness, but then she immediately felt happy for Carl. At that moment, Paul said that he was Mia's husband. The baby in his belly. The baby was his, and Carl was still waiting for Angie to come home. Paul was sorry for what he had done. He regretted what he had done. He sincerely hoped that Angie could be with Carl again. Then he left a note and left. At the end of the movie, Carl is working in the field as usual. Suddenly, he seems to feel something. Slowly, he turns around. Angie appeared in his vision in the sunshine. They look at each other as they did when they first saw each other. But this time Angie's face was no longer indifferent. She stepped forward to Carl. They finally kissed each other. I have to say, love can really destroy all worldly obstacles. The title of the movie is Who Can Love Me Like This? Angie's childhood misfortune and the oppression of the evil one made her afraid of love. She feels that no one can be trusted. But Carl, with his undying devotion to her, his unreserved love for her, giving without expecting anything in return, the forgiveness that never gives up, and made Angie feel like a spring breeze. She was in the warmth of love. I believe that the moment Angie turned back, there is no one or one thing in the world can make her leave Carl. Even if the sky and the earth are torn apart, and the seas and the rocks, she would still be by his side. I have no doubt about that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.